A quiet observer, James Miller stood alone in front of the vast observation window of the Galactic Council station. His gaze was fixed on the distant nebulae, their colorful swirls of purple and gold painting the infinite black canvas of space. The light reflected off the glass, showing a face older than his years, lined with the stress of watching a war unfold for the past 5 years. His uniform, simple yet formal in the deep blue of Earth's diplomatic court, hung loosely on his frame, a silent testament to the role he had reluctantly played in this galactic theater. Behind him, the corridors of the station hummed with activity. Alien diplomats, tall, short, multi-limbed, and a variety of other unimaginable forms, rushed to their next meetings, leaving him to his solitary thoughts. To them, he was just another primitive human, a lowly representative from a young species that had not yet earned its place at the table. Earth was an observer, allowed to watch but never to participate. Miller sighed, looking down at his datapad. The latest report flickered on its screen. The Crest Empire had destroyed 3 more Federation worlds, each attack bolder and more devastating than the last. With every passing day, the war grew more intense, but the Galactic Council's response had remained the same: weak sanctions, diplomatic protests, and nothing more. His fingers gripped the edge of the window as he read on. A colony had fallen. Thousands of innocent lives lost, families, children, all wiped out in an instant by the Empire's ruthless expansion. Another colony lost. Miller muttered to himself, the words bitter on his tongue. He turned away from the window, his boots clicking softly against the floor as he made his way toward the Council's main chamber. As he walked, the distant voices of alien diplomats echoed through the halls, their conversations a strange mixture of languages that only reminded him of how little humanity seemed to matter in the eyes of the galaxy. Inside the Council chamber, the air was thick with tension. The Federation's representative, a tall figure with translucent, crystalline skin, stood at the center platform. Their voice was unsteady, a sign of the grief they felt. The holographic display behind them showed a shattered world, a once thriving colony now nothing but a smoking ruin. The Federation had lost another world to the Crest Empire's devastating weapons. 3 million civilians, the Federation diplomat choked, gone in an instant. No warning, no chance to escape. Miller clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He had been to that colony. He had seen the faces of the people there, the families rebuilding, the children playing in the parks. Now, they were all gone. Nothing remained but ashes. The Council's response was as predictable as it was maddening. "We will increase sanctions on the Crest Empire," the head council member said, his voice as indifferent as always. "And we will send a formal protest about their violations of the war conventions." Miller wanted to scream. Sanctions, protests. Millions were dead, and the Council was sending nothing more than letters and economic penalties. But instead, he remained silent. That was what they expected of him, what they expected of all humans: to be quiet, to observe, and to learn from the more advanced species around them. As the session continued, Miller sat quietly in the far corner of the room, Earth's 3 reserved seats tucked away from the rest of the delegates. It was a reminder of humanity's place in this grand galactic hierarchy, a place of insignificance. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the subtle sneers and dismissive glances from other diplomats as they passed by. Humans were still seen as primitive, too young, too inexperienced to understand the complexities of the galaxy. But that was about to change. After the session ended, Miller made his way back to his office. His thoughts churned with anger and frustration, but he knew that nothing would change as long as he followed the rules. He had to play their game, keep his head down, and be the quiet observer. But every part of him screamed that he couldn't. Not anymore. His office was small, but filled with the latest intelligence reports, maps of the galaxy, and digital screens flashing with data. One map caught his attention: the war's progression. Red markers indicated Federation worlds that had fallen. Blue markers showed the ever-growing reach of the Crest Empire. The map was almost a mirror of what was happening in the real galaxy: Crest's relentless advance and the Federation's slow retreat. Suddenly, his computer terminal beeped, a new message flashing on the screen. It was from Tom Reynolds, an intelligence officer stationed at the Council. The message was short, but the urgency in it was undeniable. Need to meet. Maintenance Level 3. Urgent. Miller stood up, straightened his uniform, and left his office. The hallways seemed quieter now, as if the weight of the galaxy's troubles had seeped into the station's walls. As he descended to the maintenance level, he couldn't help but think about Earth's role in this conflict. The Council may have seen humanity as primitive, but what they didn't know was that Earth had been preparing in secret. They hadn't noticed the hidden orbital shipyards, the military technology Earth had reverse-engineered from damaged alien ships. They didn't know about the conviction that ran deep in humanity's veins, that standing by while innocent people died was not just wrong, but unthinkable. The lift doors opened, and Miller stepped into the dimly lit maintenance corridor. There, waiting in the shadows, was Reynolds. His usually calm demeanor was replaced with a look of urgency. He handed Miller a small data chip. "You need to see this," Reynolds said, his voice tight. Miller took the chip and inserted it into his datapad. As the files loaded, his eyes widened in shock. The Crest Empire's military command had been intercepted. The attack plans were clear. They were advancing toward Earth, and the Council had known about it for weeks. Reynolds' voice was grim. "They're pushing toward Earth Sector, James. They'll be here in a matter of months. The Council knows this. They've been watching, just like you." Miller's heart raced as he processed the information. He had been waiting for a moment to make a move. But this was it. The Council had kept humanity in the dark, kept them silent, kept them watching. But it was time to end the waiting. It was time for Earth to stop observing and start acting. He looked at Reynolds, his voice low but resolute. "We can't wait any longer. It's time to show the galaxy that humanity is done sitting on the sidelines." The galaxy would never be the same again. And Miller knew, deep down, that Earth's time had come. The hidden strength of humanity. Miller's mind raced as he stared at the datapad, the intercepted military plans from the Crest Empire flickering before him. Reynolds stood silently beside him, watching as the implications of the files began to settle in. Earth was no longer just an observer. It was now the target. "How long do we have?" Miller asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Reynolds' eyes were dark, his face drawn tight with the weight of the information he had just delivered. "A few months at most. The Empire's military campaigns are closing in on our sector, and the Council's inaction is making things worse." Miller clenched his fists. For years, Earth had played the role of the passive observer, silently watching as the galaxy's more advanced species failed to act against the Crest Empire's brutality. The Federation had lost world after world to the Empire's ruthless tactics, while the Council's response had always been the same: weak sanctions, empty words, and bureaucratic delays. He had seen it all, and it had sickened him. But now, the stakes had risen to an unimaginable level. "It's time to stop watching and start acting," Miller muttered, his voice cold with resolve. "We've seen enough." He could feel the burning fire of anger fueling his decision. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, labeled as a primitive species, unworthy of the rights and responsibilities that came with being a full member of the Galactic Council. But Miller knew something the rest of the galaxy didn't. Earth had been preparing in secret. While the Council looked down on humanity, deeming them too young to participate, Earth had been secretly advancing its own military capabilities. Miller turned to Reynolds, his voice firm. "Get me everything. Every record, every piece of evidence you've got. I want to know everything about this Council and what they've been hiding." Reynolds nodded, already on it. Miller knew that once the truth was revealed, there would be no turning back. He had already begun gathering the pieces. The weapons deals the council members had secretly brokered, the falsified reports that kept Earth in the dark, and most importantly, the evidence that the council had been profiting from the war. He walked back to his office, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. The silence of the station, once a comforting background to his daily routine, now seemed ominous. His computer beeped as new data began to load. Miller sat down at his desk, his hands trembling slightly as he sifted through the files Reynolds had gathered. The documents showed a staggering amount of corruption. The same council members who had blocked Earth's full membership were the ones who had been funneling weapons to both sides of the war. They were profiting from the destruction, trading arms to the Crest Empire while pretending to support the Federation's efforts. Miller's anger flared as he read on. The Council had kept humanity out of the war for one reason: fear. They had feared Earth's potential, its military capabilities. They knew that once humanity joined the fight, the entire balance of power in the galaxy would shift. But what the Council didn't know was that humanity had been preparing, quietly building up its forces. Miller had been a part of that preparation. He knew that Earth's military, though young by galactic standards, was more advanced than they realized. Earth had reverse-engineered alien technology from the wreckage of battleships and space stations, giving them a technological edge that no one could have anticipated. The warships Earth had been secretly constructing were ready. The technology they had developed was ready. And most importantly, humanity's resolve to fight for justice was unwavering. Miller's eyes turned hard as he glanced at the map on his desk. The Crest Empire's forces were moving closer to Earth's sector every day. Soon, they would be within striking distance. The Federation had little time left. But the worst part was that the Council had known about the impending attack and done nothing. He knew what he had to do. Miller contacted Reynolds again. "Prepare the evidence. I'm going to the Council. It's time to stop playing the observer." Reynolds hesitated. "Are you sure? The Council will do everything they can to stop you. They'll claim that Earth has no right to interfere, that we're just an observer species. They'll try to silence you." "I don't care," Miller said, his voice firm. "The galaxy needs to know what's really happening. They need to see the truth, and if the Council tries to stop me, we'll expose them for what they are: cowards and profiteers. Humanity's time to act is now." With the evidence secured, Miller made his way to the Council chamber, his mind focused and determined. He knew that once he stepped into that room, there would be no going back. The Council members, with their smug arrogance and their corrupt dealings, would no longer hold power over Earth. It was time to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't just another primitive species waiting to be ignored. They had been watching. They had been learning. And now, they were ready to act. The main Council chamber was buzzing with activity as Miller entered. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats, some conversing in low voices, others staring into the holographic displays that filled the room with glowing images of the ongoing war. But Miller wasn't here to watch. He wasn't here to remain silent. The head council member, a tall figure with gray skin and an air of superiority, called the session to order. As he droned on about the latest sanctions against the Crest Empire, Miller's patience wore thin. He knew this was all a facade, a performance meant to placate the galaxy while nothing of substance was being done. Without waiting for permission, Miller stood up and strode to the center of the chamber, his voice cutting through the monotonous speeches. "Point of order," he said loudly, his words echoing through the vast room. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, and for a moment, there was disbelief. An observer species, no, a human, daring to interrupt the proceedings. "Earth requests immediate speaking rights," Miller declared, his voice unwavering. The head council member looked down at him, a mix of annoyance and disbelief crossing his face. "Observer species do not have speaking rights during full sessions," he said dismissively, gesturing for Miller to return to his seat. But Miller stood his ground. "Article 47 of the Council Charter," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, allows any species to speak when they have evidence of actions that threaten galactic peace. I invoke that right." The room erupted into a flurry of whispers, the council members exchanging wary glances. Miller could feel their fear. They knew what was coming. They had hoped Earth would remain silent forever. But Miller was done watching. He activated his data pad, and a holographic display came to life. The evidence was irrefutable. Proof of the Council's secret weapons deals, proof of their corruption, and proof that they had been withholding vital information from the galaxy. For 5 years, Miller began, his voice resonating through the chamber. Earth has watched as millions died. We've watched as the Crest Empire destroyed world after world. And we've watched as this council has done nothing but offer empty words and hollow promises. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. These council members, he pointed to several names on the screen, have been profiting from this war. They've sold weapons to both sides while pretending to want peace. The room went silent, and for the first time in 5 years, Miller felt the weight of a different kind of attention. The galaxy had been watching Earth, but now it was Earth's turn to make them listen. The breaking point. The silence in the council chamber was suffocating, and for a moment, it felt like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The revelations Miller had just exposed hung heavy in the air, the faces of the council members ranging from disbelief to outright panic. It was clear they hadn't expected this kind of challenge, especially not from a human. The head council member, a tall, silver-skinned being from the Zyran sector, was the first to regain his composure. He straightened, his voice cold as ice. "This is absurd. The Council has always acted in the best interest of galactic peace. These are baseless accusations. Miller cut him off, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "You can lie, but the truth is already out there. The Federation's military intelligence, the diplomats, they all know. The galaxy knows. The Council is nothing more than a puppet show, and you're pulling the strings behind the curtain." The Zyran representative's face twisted in anger, but it was the soft murmur of agreement from several other delegates that sent a chill through the room. The truth had spread like wildfire, and now the Council was cornered. Miller stepped forward, tapping his data pad again, and more evidence flickered onto the holographic screen. Detailed accounts of the Council's covert transactions, billions of credits worth of weapons, resources, and technology exchanged under the table, were laid bare for all to see. The names of the most influential members, who had once acted as paragons of peace, now stood exposed as profiteers, willing to sell out the entire galaxy for their own gain. "We've seen enough of your empty speeches," Miller continued, his voice growing louder, "and we're done waiting for you to act. You've left Earth and the rest of the galaxy to rot while you've lined your pockets. We demand accountability. Now." The room erupted in chaos. The delegates began shouting, some in disbelief, others in fury, but it was clear that the once unshakable power of the Council had been fractured. The murmurs of distrust spread like wildfire, and the once dominant members who had ruled the galaxy for centuries now found themselves struggling to hold on to their seats. The Zyran representative rose, his voice trembling with rage. "You have no right to make these accusations, human. You're an observer species, a mere speck in the galaxy. You think you can just walk in here and—" "I think I just did," Miller interrupted, his tone cutting through the rising voices like a blade. "And if the Council can't uphold its duty to the galaxy, then maybe it's time for new leadership." The words struck like a hammer blow, and for a long moment, the chamber was silent. Even the most stubborn council members seemed to pause, contemplating what Miller had just said. They had become complacent, secure in their positions of power. But now, the threat of exposure loomed over them, and they were no longer the untouchable giants they once were. Miller's eyes scanned the room, locking on each council member who had profited from the war. The whispers of dissent had begun, but it was the voice of a representative from the Terran system, a longtime supporter of Earth's struggles, that finally broke the tension. "I second the motion." The voice rang out, firm and resolute. Miller turned sharply to see a woman standing, her face set with determination. Her name was Rasha Vale, a well-respected diplomat from the Federation, and her words carried weight. "The Council has lost its credibility. The Federation has lost its trust in you. If this corruption runs deeper than we've been led to believe, it's time for a change." Miller could feel a flicker of hope. For the first time, it seemed that the tide was shifting. One by one, several other representatives stood in support, adding their voices to the growing chorus calling for reform. The words that had once been taboo, dismantling the Council, holding its members accountable, now seemed within reach. But the Zyran representative was not so easily defeated. His eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. "You may have exposed us, Miller, but you've made a terrible mistake. The Empire will not stand idly by while you tear apart the very fabric of galactic order. The Crest Empire will retaliate." Miller stood tall, unshaken. "Let them. We've been fighting in the shadows for too long. It's time we fought on our terms, not theirs." He turned his back on the Council and faced the delegation. "Humanity is not afraid. We may be new to the galactic stage, but we fought for our survival long before we ever made contact with you. We will stand our ground, and we will do whatever it takes to protect our people." A ripple of agreement ran through the room, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Miller felt the weight of history shift. The galaxy had always underestimated humanity, but this moment would mark a turning point. Earth was no longer the observer. It was a player in the galactic game, and they were going to reshape the future. As Miller prepared to leave the chamber, the voice of the head council member echoed behind him. "You may have won today, but the war is far from over. You're making a dangerous enemy, Miller." Miller turned back, his eyes flashing with determination. "Good. We've been waiting for one." The rising tide. The council chamber doors slammed shut behind Miller with a force that echoed in the hallways. For a brief moment, it felt as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath. The next steps were uncertain, the weight of the future hanging in the balance. But as Miller walked down the cold, metallic corridors of the council station, he felt a flicker of hope that had been absent for far too long. Something was changing, and this time, humanity would no longer sit idly by. Reynolds, waiting near a side corridor, caught his gaze and nodded in silent recognition. Miller didn't need words. They both knew what had just transpired was bigger than any of them could have anticipated. The council might have been shaken, but the path ahead would be anything but smooth. "How are we looking?" Miller asked as he approached. Reynolds handed him a datapad, the screen flickering with the latest intelligence. "The Federation's response is optimistic, but cautious. They want to see more proof of our capabilities before they make any official moves. They're not willing to trust us completely. Not yet." Miller frowned. They can't afford to wait. The Crest Empire is closing in on their last remaining strongholds. If they don't act now, there won't be anything left to save. "I agree," Reynolds replied. "But the Federation is entrenched in its own politics. They've been losing worlds for years now, and they're reluctant to gamble on a new ally, especially one as unpredictable as humanity." Miller gritted his teeth. He knew the Federation was in a desperate situation, but he couldn't afford to let them drag their feet. "I'll talk to them again. Push them if I have to." As the two men continued walking, Miller couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions ahead. The evidence they'd uncovered was damning. The corruption within the council ran deep, far deeper than they had initially suspected. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the systematic destruction of entire civilizations for profit. But more than that, it was about a failure of leadership on a galactic scale. The war, it seemed, was only one part of a much larger story. The Council had allowed the war to escalate, not just because they were unwilling to act, but because they had a stake in its continuation. They wanted chaos. It kept the galaxy fragmented, easier to manipulate and control. And if humanity, if Earth, got in the way of that, well, they would be dealt with, quietly, without so much as a whisper of protest from the rest of the galaxy. But Miller wasn't going to stand by and watch it unfold. The day of quiet observation was over. If the galaxy wouldn't act, then humanity would, and they would show them what it meant to be underestimated. A call to action. Back in his small, cluttered office, Miller began to draft his next message. This one wasn't for the Council or for the Federation. It was for Earth. He was reaching out to the military command back home, bringing them into the fold of the plan that was already beginning to take shape. The hidden orbital shipyards were ready. The reverse-engineered alien technology was functional. And most importantly, humanity had a will to fight unlike any other species in the galaxy. The time for politics and diplomacy had passed. It was time to act. He hit send. A secret meeting. Hours later, Miller found himself in an unmarked room on a lower level of the Council station. The dim lights flickered overhead as Reynolds paced back and forth, a look of concern etched on his face. "You sure about this?" Reynolds asked, his voice low. "Once we move forward, there's no going back." Miller nodded firmly. "We don't have a choice. We've already lost too much. If we don't fight now, we might never get another chance." Reynolds stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "But what about the Federation? You're sure they'll be on our side when this goes public?" Miller took a deep breath. The Federation's been hemorrhaging worlds. They're on the edge of collapse. If we offer them a way out, if we can prove to them that we're serious, they won't turn their backs on us. But that's a big if, Reynolds cautioned. Miller's eyes narrowed. "And if we don't act, Earth will be next. The Crest Empire won't stop until they've wiped out everything in their path. If we don't show the galaxy we're ready to fight back, then we're no better than the Council." The decision had been made. "All right," Reynolds said after a moment of silence, his voice steady. "Let's do it. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." Miller felt a surge of determination. It wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about restoring honor, about proving that Earth had a right to be heard in this galaxy, no matter how primitive the rest of the galaxy thought they were. The countdown begins. Back in the heart of the Council station, the Zeren representative watched Miller from across the room, his eyes filled with barely contained fury. He knew the human diplomat was planning something that could change the course of the war. And whatever it wasn't something the Crest Empire would take lying down. "We cannot let them succeed," the Zeren murmured to a fellow diplomat. "We won't," the other replied coldly. "The Crest Empire has already made it clear. If humanity steps out of line, they will burn." The weight of those words hung in the air. The war was far from over, and the stakes had just gotten much higher. But for the first time, humanity wasn't just on the sidelines. They were in the game, and they were playing to win. The battle for recognition. Miller's mind raced as he moved through the dimly lit hallways of the Council station, each step carrying a heavier burden than the last. The decision had been made. Humanity would no longer stand by as silent observers. They would enter the war, not as pawns, but as players with a purpose, with a resolve stronger than any force the galaxy had seen before. But first, there were obstacles to overcome, ones that ran deeper than he had ever imagined. Miller's message to Earth had been received, and it had been urgent. The military was ready, their shipyards were operational, and the technologies they had reverse-engineered from the wreckage of alien ships were more advanced than even the Council realized. But as Miller had predicted, the Federation was slow to move. They were still unwilling to fully trust humanity, still hesitant to accept them as allies in a galactic conflict of such magnitude. "The Federation is too fractured," Reynolds said, his voice laced with frustration as he met Miller in the dimly lit observation deck. "They're still playing politics, hoping for a miracle, while the Crest Empire crushes everything in their path." Miller stared out at the stars, his eyes narrowing as he considered the situation. The Federation's hesitance was not just a tactical delay. It was rooted in fear. Fear that humanity's rapid advancement would outstrip them, that Earth's presence in the war might shift the balance of power. The galaxy's oldest civilizations had been stagnating for millennia, and now a young species from a backwater planet had the potential to change everything. "They're scared of us," Miller muttered. "They're scared of what we could become, and that fear is holding them back." "Fear isn't going to win this war," Reynolds replied. "If we want to save the Federation, we need to force their hand." Miller's jaw clenched. "I know, and we will. But it has to be more than just us. We need a symbol, something to show the galaxy that we're not just primitive observers. We're a force to be reckoned with." The pieces were slowly falling into place. Miller and Reynolds had been gathering more than just intelligence. They had been building a coalition, albeit a fragile one. There were pockets of resistance within the Federation, secret factions that had long been disillusioned with the Council's inability to act. These were the voices Miller needed, those who still believed in the possibility of a better galaxy, a galaxy where peace was not just a word, but a reality. But time was running out. "We're losing ground," Reynolds said, glancing at the data on his pad. "The Crest Empire is making its move. Their fleets are less than a week away from Federation space, and if we don't act now, there won't be anything left to save." Miller took a deep breath, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. "We don't need to wait for permission anymore. We don't need the Council. We need to act now." It was a risky move, one that could alienate the Federation and lead to open conflict with the Council, but Miller knew there was no other option. Humanity had spent years watching the war unfold from the sidelines, and now it was time to show the galaxy just how wrong they had been about Earth. Miller's next message was clear. It was time to join the fight, whether the Federation was ready or not. If they refused to act, humanity would take matters into their own hands. He included a detailed report on the Crest Empire's next target, an undefended colony on the edge of Federation space, where millions of innocent lives were about to be wiped out. The Federation's response came swiftly, but not in the way Miller had hoped. They were indecisive, still fearful of Earth's growing power, still reluctant to risk angering the Council. "The Federation is losing worlds every week, but they won't make a move unless we force their hand," Reynolds said, his voice strained with frustration. Miller stood tall, determined to take matters into his own hands. "Then we'll show them what we're capable of. No more waiting." Humanity's moment. The plan was simple. Strike first, strike hard, and show the galaxy that humanity was no longer a passive player in this conflict. Earth had its own fleet, a fleet that had been built in secret, hidden beneath the veneer of a primitive species. It was time to reveal their true strength. "Get the fleet ready," Miller said to Reynolds. "We leave tomorrow." The air was thick with tension as Miller prepared for what was about to come. He knew the risks. The Council would not take kindly to humanity's defiance, and the Federation would be caught in the middle. But this was bigger than politics, bigger than galactic treaties. This was about survival. This was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. A show of force. The day of departure came faster than Miller had anticipated. The fleet, composed of Earth's finest ships and the alien technology they had reverse-engineered, was ready to go. As Miller boarded the command ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. "Ready when you are, sir," Reynolds said, standing at attention as the crew made final preparations. Miller nodded. "Let's show them what humanity can do." The command ship's engines roared to life, and soon the fleet was jumping into hyperspace, heading toward the Federation's front lines. But the Crest Empire wouldn't know what hit them. The first strike. The first strike came swiftly. Miller's fleet dropped out of hyperspace just outside the Federation's capital world, catching the enemy off guard. The Crest Empire's forces, already stretched thin, were unprepared for the sudden assault. It wasn't a full-scale invasion, but it didn't need to be. Earth's ships, equipped with the best of both human and alien technology, tore through the enemy's defenses with precision and power. "We've got their attention," Reynolds said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Now, let's finish this." The battle raged on, a chaotic maelstrom of lasers and debris as Earth's fleet tore through the Crest Empire's defenses with unrelenting fury. Miller watched from the command deck, his heart pounding as his crew executed their tactics with precision. Every ship, every maneuver, was a testament to humanity's determination to carve a place in the galaxy that could no longer be ignored. The Crest Empire wasn't just surprised. They were stunned. Their ships, powerful and advanced as they were, lacked the flexibility and agility that Earth's fleet had honed over years of secrecy. The alien technologies humanity had discovered and adapted gave them a critical edge. Shields that flickered with an eerie glow, weapons that pulsed with devastating energy, and hyperdrives that allowed them to strike faster than their enemies could react. The Federation, meanwhile, was still hesitant. Miller had expected it, but he had hoped for more. The Council was caught in a web of bureaucracy and old fears, unable to act decisively. They had always prided themselves on their diplomacy, their patience. But there were no more opportunities for waiting. As the first wave of Crest ships fell, Miller knew that this was a moment of truth. Either the Federation would rally behind humanity's cause, or Earth would be forced to fight this war on its own terms. "Crest reinforcements are en route," Reynolds said, his voice steady but tinged with the recognition that this was far from over. The Crest Empire was vast, and this was just the beginning. "We'll need to move quickly if we're going to maintain the momentum." "We'll be ready," Miller responded. He glanced at the tactical map, watching as his fleet's ships circled the remnants of the Crest forces. The enemy was regrouping, but the damage had been done. Miller's gamble had paid off. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had made its mark. Back on Earth, the message had already been sent. Miller's actions had proven that humanity would no longer hide behind the protection of the Federation's frail bureaucracy. Earth's fleet was powerful, and they were willing to risk everything to protect their people and the galaxy at large. Yet the real battle wasn't just the one fought in space. It was the political struggle that would determine whether Earth would remain an ally or be left to fight alone. The Federation's response came not from the Council chambers, but from a few unexpected voices. Discontent had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. There were those within the Federation who had grown tired of the Council's inertia, tired of the political games that left entire sectors vulnerable to the onslaught of the Crest Empire. For the first time, there was real talk of rebellion, of a new galactic order. "The Federation has voted," Reynolds said, his voice low, filled with an urgency that both terrified and invigorated Miller. "The Council has agreed to back our campaign, but with conditions." Miller's pulse quickened. Conditions. What do they want now? They want to control the war effort. They'll provide ships and troops, but they want a say in every strategy. They won't hand over command to us. Miller closed his eyes, his mind racing. The Federation's approval was critical, but he had never expected them to fully relinquish control. Their bureaucracy, their centuries of peace, had bred a culture of hesitation, of control. It was clear they wanted humanity's strength, but not at the cost of their own influence. "We won't let them dictate the terms," Miller said, his voice hardening. "We've proven we can handle ourselves. We'll accept their help, but we'll keep command of our own forces. This war is too important to let them weaken our position." The next days were a blur of meetings and communications, but Miller's resolve remained unshaken. The Federation would be forced to accept humanity's growing influence in the war. They would have no choice but to recognize that Earth was no longer just a pawn in their galactic games. The battle against the Crest Empire intensified as more ships from the Federation arrived. With the combined strength of Earth's fleet and the reluctant support of the Federation, they were able to strike deeper into Crest-controlled territories. But as victories mounted, so did the challenges. The Crest Empire was ruthless, its war machine a behemoth that would not be easily stopped. Every victory came at a cost, but each victory also proved a point. Humanity was no longer the underdog. Their courage, their innovation, their ability to adapt had turned the tide. But it wasn't just the battle that mattered now. It was the future of the galaxy, who would define its future and what role humanity would play in it. Miller found himself standing at the edge of his command deck once more, staring into the vast expanse of space. He knew the stakes had changed. Earth wasn't just a player in this war anymore. They were a force, a rising power with the will to shape the galaxy's future. But with power came responsibility and enemies. As Miller prepared for the next phase of the war, he understood the full weight of what he had done. The Crest Empire was far from defeated, and the Federation's grip on the galaxy was weakening. Yet a new order was forming, and humanity was at its center. It was a dangerous game they were playing, but it was one they would play to the end. The war was far from over, but now humanity was in control of its own fate. The final confrontation. The galaxy had been in chaos for too long, but now, standing on the precipice of change, Miller felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders. As the war against the Crest Empire raged on, humanity had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. The days of observing from the sidelines, of watching as galactic politics played out with no regard for the innocent, were over. Now, Earth had a voice, and that voice was shaping the future of the galaxy. Miller paced the command deck, his mind racing as the latest intelligence reports came in. The Crest Empire was not backing down. Their military had been decimated, but their resolve remained unwavering. Their leadership had been fractured, yet there were still loyalists within their ranks, forces that would fight until the last breath. But it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't just about military strategy. It was about making a statement, about showing the galaxy that humanity's place wasn't as an observer, but as a key player in the balance of power. "I'm ready," Reynolds said, breaking the silence. He had been with Miller from the very beginning, supporting him as they navigated the murky waters of galactic politics and war. Now, they were on the verge of something much bigger, something that would forever change the course of human history. "Are we sure the Federation will back us?" Miller asked, his voice tinged with a hint of doubt. The Federation's support had been conditional from the start. Would they truly stand by humanity's decision to take the fight to the Crest Empire's capital, to strike at the heart of their power? "They'll back us," Reynolds replied with quiet confidence. "They have no choice. This is bigger than just Earth now. The Federation understands that if the Crest Empire wins, it's the end for everyone. Humanity's leadership in this war has shown them that we are not just the future of the galaxy, but the key to its survival." Miller nodded, feeling the weight of their collective responsibility. The Federation, despite its bureaucracy and reluctance, was finally coming around. They had no choice but to recognize humanity's strength. But it wasn't just about their strength. It was about their unwavering belief that standing up against tyranny and oppression was a universal truth, something that transcended borders, species, and the politics of the galaxy. The final assault on the Crest Empire's homeworld was set. Earth's fleet, bolstered by Federation forces, was ready. They would strike at the heart of the enemy's power and bring the war to an end. The stakes had never been higher. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, and this time, Earth wasn't going to wait for permission. As the fleet set course for the Crest capital, Miller stood in front of the war room's display, watching the stars stretch out before him. The journey ahead was perilous. The Crest Empire had prepared for this moment, fortifying their capital with all the military might they had left. But Miller wasn't worried. Humanity had always been underestimated. And now, with the combined strength of Earth's fleet and the Federation's reluctant support, they would show the galaxy that they could stand up to any empire, any force that sought to dominate. "This is it," Reynolds said, standing beside Miller. "The final push, the end of the war." Miller's gaze hardened as he looked out into the vastness of space. He had spent 5 years watching the galaxy's complacency, its failure to act as millions of lives were lost to the Crest Empire's unchecked aggression. But now, everything was different. Humanity was no longer just an observer. They were a force capable of shaping the future. "This isn't just the end of the war," Miller said, his voice low and resolute. "This is the beginning of something new, a new era. An era where we, as a species, take our place in the galaxy, not just as survivors, but as leaders." The fleet jumped into hyperspace, and as they approached the Crest Empire's capital, the reality of what they were about to do hit home. This wasn't just a military strike. It was a declaration that humanity would no longer be relegated to the sidelines, that they had a stake in the future of the galaxy. The battle began in earnest as Earth's fleet arrived at the gates of the Crest Empire's stronghold. The space around the capital erupted into chaos, with laser fire lighting up the void and explosions rocking the dark expanse. The Crest Empire's defenses were formidable, but humanity had come prepared. Miller's command ship led the charge, cutting through enemy lines with precision. The Crest Empire's ships, once the epitome of power, now appeared sluggish and uncoordinated, unable to match the relentless offensive of Earth's forces. Miller's tactics were unconventional, pushing the fleet to its limits, but it was clear that Earth's advantage, its adaptability, its innovation, and its indomitable will, was too much for the Crest Empire to handle. As the final blow was struck, and the Crest capital fell, Miller allowed himself a moment to breathe. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. The galaxy was forever changed, and Earth had earned its place among the stars. But Miller knew that victory wasn't just about military conquest. It was about the message they had sent to the galaxy, that humanity, despite being young and inexperienced, was not to be underestimated. Their resilience, their refusal to stand by as innocent lives were destroyed, had been their greatest weapon. And it was this weapon that had ultimately won the war. The Federation, now fully aware of humanity's power and potential, would no longer be able to deny Earth's place at the table. The Council would have no choice but to accept Earth as a full-fledged member, not just an observer, but a leader among the stars. As the final remnants of the Crest Empire's resistance crumbled, Miller stood on the bridge of his command ship, looking out into the stars. The galaxy was vast, and the future uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, he felt that humanity's place in it was secure. The age of waiting was over. The age of action had begun. And Earth, now united and stronger than ever, was ready to lead.